Some betrayals are whispers in the dark. Others are a spectacle, a public execution of the heart. For Lena Coleman, it happened under the blinding glare of 1,000 crystal lights at the annual Founders Gala. Her husband, Brent Coleman, a titan of industry, didn't just leave her. He publicly crucified her, replacing her on his arm with another woman. A woman who was supposed to be family. Lena was left shattered, a ghost in her own life. But what Brent in his towering arrogance forgot was that some ghosts have family of their own. And her family, the one she'd left behind, didn't deal in whispers. They dealt in screams. This isn't a story about a broken heart. It's a story about what happens when a broken woman makes one last desperate phone call to a man the underworld knows only as the Ghost. The ballroom of the Metropolitan Grand was a galaxy of artificial stars. Each crystal on the chandeliers overhead refracted the light, casting a diamond dust glow over the city's elite. Lena Coleman felt the familiar gentle pressure of her husband's hand on the small of her back. She was wearing a deep sapphire gown by a designer whose name she couldn't recall, the fabric cool against her skin. It was the kind of dress Brent liked, elegant, understated, expensive. It made her an accessory, a perfect complement to his custom-tailored Tom Ford suit. Brent Coleman was a man sculpted from ambition and polished by success. His firm, Coleman Capital, had its logo discreetly but proudly displayed on the gala's sponsorship banner. Tonight was his night. He was receiving the Philanthropist of the Year award, a carefully orchestrated public relations move to soften the edges of his ruthless corporate reputation. Lena smiled, the practiced, gentle curve of her lips that she'd perfected over 10 years of marriage. She networked with the wives of other powerful men, discussing summer plans in the Hamptons and the latest charity auctions. It was a language she spoke fluently, a life she had meticulously helped Brent build. She was the architect of their social standing, designing a life of effortless grace while he bulldozed his way through the financial world. "Darling," Brent murmured, his voice a low thrum against her ear. "You look magnificent." He squeezed her waist, a proprietary gesture. But his eyes weren't on her. They were scanning the room, calculating, assessing, always moving. Lately they had been moving more than usual. A subtle distance had grown between them over the past year. It started with late nights at the office, then unexplained weekend trips. When she questioned him, he'd called her paranoid smothering. He'd gifted her a new tennis bracelet, as if diamonds could patch the cracks forming in the foundation of their marriage. Lena had tried to believe him. Denial was a warm, comfortable blanket. The master of ceremonies, a local news anchor with a plastic smile, took the stage. After a litany of platitudes, he announced, "And now to accept the Philanthropist of the Year, award a man whose vision is matched only by his generosity, Mr. Brent Coleman." The room erupted in polite, sustained applause. Brent kissed Lena's cheek, a cold, dry press of lips. "Wish me luck," he whispered, though he never needed it. He thrived in the spotlight. Lena watched him ascend the stage, a proud swelling in her chest warring with a knot of anxiety in her stomach. He was handsome, charming, the man she had fallen in love with, or at least the man she thought she had. He began his speech with the usual thanks to the board and his team. He spoke of community, of giving back, of building a better future. Lena felt a genuine smile touch her lips. This was the Brent she wanted to believe in. But a man is nothing without the bedrock that supports him. Brent continued, his voice resonating through the speakers. "My success is not my own. It is built on a foundation of support, inspiration, and profound love. He paused, and the room grew quiet, anticipating the heartfelt tribute to his wife. Lena's heart fluttered. Perhaps she had been wrong. Perhaps the distance was all in her head. Brent's eyes scanned the crowd, and for a heart-stopping moment, they met Lena's. But there was no warmth in them. They were cold, like polished steel. Then they moved past her, locking onto someone else in the crowd. "For too long," Brent said, his voice taking on a tone of dramatic confession. "I have lived a life that wasn't entirely true. We build facades, we maintain appearances, because we believe it's what's expected of us. But true philanthropy, true vision, begin with truth to oneself." A confused murmur rippled through the audience. Lena's smile faltered. The knot in her stomach tightened into a cold, hard stone. "And my truth," Brent declared, his voice ringing with faux sincerity, "is that the greatest inspiration in my life, the woman who has shown me what true passion and partnership mean, is not the woman everyone assumes." The air was sucked from Lena's lungs. The applause died. Every eye in the room swiveled from Brent on the stage to Lena at the table, her face frozen in a mask of disbelief. "So tonight," Brent continued, a cruel smile playing on his lips, "I want to be honest. I want to honor the woman who truly holds my heart. Tiffany, my love, will you please join me?" Time seemed to slow down. Out of the crowd, from a table not far from Lena's, a figure rose. It was Tiffany Monroe, her cousin. Tiffany, with her bottle-blonde hair and a scarlet dress that clung to her like a second skin, glided towards the stage. She was everything Lena was, not loud, audacious, overtly sensual. She was the daughter of Lena's mother's sister, a girl Lena had shared summers and secrets with as a child. A girl who had been in her home 100 times, sharing wine, laughing at her jokes, calling her cuz. The ultimate betrayal wasn't just the affair. It was the choice of accomplice. It was the calculated cruelty of it. Tiffany reached the stage and took Brent's hand. He pulled her close and kissed her a deep, passionate kiss for the cameras and the gawking audience. The flashbulbs from the press section went off like a volley of gunfire. But Brent wasn't finished. He looked directly at Lena, his voice dripping with condescending pity. "Lena and I will of course be finalizing our separation. I wish her all the best. She is a good woman, just not my woman." He then held up Tiffany's hand. "This is my future." The room was a cacophony of shocked gasps and feverish whispers. Lena felt 1,000 pairs of eyes on her, dissecting her, pitying her. She felt stripped bare, flayed olive, in front of everyone they knew. Her chair screeched against the polished floor as she stood up, her body moving on pure, unthinking instinct. She didn't run. She walked, head held high, through the maze of tables, her sapphire gown a blur of motion. She could feel the stares like physical blows against her skin. As she passed Tiffany's empty chair, she saw it. Lying on the table, next to a half-empty glass of champagne, was a necklace. It was a delicate vintage piece of silver filigree with a small inset sapphire. Her grandmother's necklace, the one that had gone missing from her jewelry box 2 months ago. The one Brent had sworn he'd help her look for, patting her hand and telling her it would turn up. Tiffany had been over for dinner that night. The sight of it broke something inside her. The last vestiges of her composure shattered. A strangled sob escaped her throat. She stumbled out of the ballroom, past the stunned valets, and into the cool, unforgiving night air of the city. The sounds of the gala faded behind her, replaced by the wail of a distant siren. She hailed a cab, her voice a raw whisper, and gave the address to the St. Regis penthouse she no longer considered home. The humiliation was absolute, a poison seeping into her very soul. Brent hadn't just ended their marriage. He had immolated her entire life for sport. The penthouse was silent. It was a cavernous, impersonal space filled with art Lena had chosen and furniture Brent had paid for. The panoramic windows displayed the glittering city skyline, a mocking reminder of the life that had just been stolen from her. She walked through the rooms, her heels clicking on the marble floors, the sound echoing the hollowness inside her. His scent was everywhere, the sandalwood and leather of his cologne, the faint smell of cigar smoke in his study. She sank onto a white leather sofa, the sapphire dress pooling around her like spilled ink. The shock had worn off, leaving behind a grief so profound it felt physical, a crushing weight on her chest. She replayed the scene in the ballroom over and over. Brent's cold eyes, Tiffany's triumphant smirk, the pitying stares, the necklace. Hours passed. The city lights began to dim. Sometime after 3 a.m., the elevator chimed, and Brent walked in. He loosened his tie, his movements casual, as if he were coming home from a normal day at the office. "Lena," he said, his tone devoid of emotion. "You shouldn't have run out like that. It made things awkward." Lena stared at him, her voice a dry rasp. "Awkward? You dismantled my life in front of 200 people, and you're worried about it being awkward." "I was being honest," he retorted, pouring himself a scotch, "something I thought you valued. Look, this was going to happen sooner or later. Doing it this way, it's clean. A single break. No messy, drawn-out drama." "Clean!" She shrieked, the sound tearing from her throat. "You did this with my cousin Brent. In our home, you let her wear my grandmother's necklace." He shrugged, taking a sip of his drink. "Tiffany admired it. It looked better on her anyway. She has the neckline for it." The casual cruelty of his words was like a slap. "Don't be so sentimental. It's just a thing." That was it. That was the moment the grief curdled into something else, something cold and hard and sharp. It was rage, pure, unadulterated rage. "Get out," she whispered. "This is my apartment, Lena. You'll be the one leaving. My lawyer will send your lawyer the paperwork tomorrow. I'll be generous. You won't have to worry about money." "I said, get out," she screamed, snatching a heavy crystal vase from a side table and hurling it at the wall next to his head. It shattered with a deafening crash. For the first time, a flicker of something surprise, maybe even fear, crossed his face. He backed away. "Fine, you're hysterical. I'll stay at the club tonight. We'll talk when you've calmed down. Pack your things." He turned and left. The elevator doors slid shut, sealing her in the silent tomb of their life together. Lena stood amidst the wreckage of her marriage, trembling not with sorrow, but with fury. He thought he could just discard her. He thought money could solve everything. He believed he was untouchable, a god in his own universe, and she was just a piece of disposable scenery. He had taken her love, her loyalty, her family, and her dignity. He had left her with nothing. But he was wrong. She wasn't entirely without family. She walked to the study, her steps now steady and purposeful. There was a side of her family she never spoke of, a life she had run away from when she was 18. Her mother had been the white sheep, the one who had married an American academic and escaped the old world. But her father's family, they were different. They hadn't left the old ways behind. Her father had died when she was young, but she remembered his brother, her uncle. And she remembered her uncle's son, her cousin, a boy she had played with in the sprawling, overgrown gardens of a dacha outside the city. A boy with quiet, watchful eyes who was fiercely protective of her. She hadn't spoken to him in 15 years. Their worlds were galaxies apart. She was Mrs. Lena Coleman, socialite and philanthropist's wife. He was something else. A name whispered in fearful tones in certain circles. A phantom who moved between continents, leaving ripples of chaos in his wake. She opened a locked drawer in the antique desk, a place Brent never looked. Inside was a small, worn, leather-bound address book. Her mother's. She flipped through the pages until she found it. A single entry written in her mother's elegant Cyrillic script. Just a name and a long international number. Dimitri. Her finger hovered over the contact on her phone. Making this call was crossing a line she could never uncross. It was inviting a storm into her life, a storm that could destroy everything it touched. But her life was already destroyed. The gilded hall was already a pile of rubble. What more did she have to lose? She thought of Brent's smirk, Tiffany's kiss the necklace. The cold, hard rage solidified into a diamond-sharp resolve. He wanted to see her ruined. He wanted her to disappear quietly. She would not. Her thumb pressed the call button. It rang once, twice, 3 times. She was about to hang up, thinking it was a dead number, a relic of a forgotten past. Then a voice answered. It was low, calm, and laced with an accent she hadn't heard in years. It was a voice that held an unnerving stillness, the sound of absolute control. "Da!" She took a shaky breath. "Dimitri." There was a pause on the other end. The silence was heavy, analytical. "Who is this?" The voice asked, no recognition in it. It's Lena," she said, her own name sounding foreign on her tongue. "Uncle Fyodor's niece. Your cousin." Another long silence. She could almost hear the gears turning, the memories being accessed from some deep, dark archive. Then the voice changed. The coldness receded, replaced by a single, soft-spoken word that carried the weight of 15 years of separation. "Lenochka." Tears she hadn't been able to shed for Brent now streamed down her face. It was the childhood name he had for her. It was the sound of a forgotten world, a different kind of power. "Dimitri," she sobbed, the rage and grief pouring out of her. "I need help. My husband, he—" "Stop!" the voice on the other end commanded, cutting through her hysteria with surgical precision. "Do not speak of this on the phone. Where are you?" She told him the address. "Stay there. Do not leave. Do not speak to anyone. I am coming." The line went dead. Lena stared at the phone, a tremor running through her. She didn't know when he would come or how. She only knew that she had just opened a door to a darkness that Brent Coleman, in all his arrogant glory, could never possibly comprehend. She had rung the bell, and the devil had just answered. 2 days passed in a suspended state of tense and anxiety. Lena didn't leave the penthouse. She ignored the incessant buzzing of her phone calls from her friends, wanting gossip from her mother, crying from Brent's lawyer. She ordered food but barely ate. She showered and dressed in simple clothes, a stranger in her own home. The shattered vase remained on the floor, a monument to her broken life. She felt like a ghost haunting the final hours of her own existence. On the 3rd evening, just as the sun bled across the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet, The private elevator to the penthouse chimed. Not the loud, confident chime it made when Brent arrived, but a soft, almost imperceptible signal. The doors opened, but it wasn't Brent. Two men stepped out first. They were both large, dressed in impeccably tailored dark suits, with earpieces that were all but invisible. They moved with an unnerving economy of motion, their eyes sweeping the room, assessing every shadow, every exit. They were not bodyguards in the way Brent had bodyguards, beefy men for show. These men were predators. Then a third man followed them out. He was not as physically imposing as his companions, but he owned the space the moment he entered it. He was tall and lean, dressed in a charcoal grey suit that fit him like a glove. His dark hair was cut short. His face was all sharp angles and shadows, with high cheekbones and a strong jaw. But it was his eyes that held you captive. They were a pale, icy grey, and they missed nothing. They were the eyes she remembered from her childhood, watchful, intelligent, and utterly unreadable. Dimitri Volkov had aged, but the essence of him was the same. He was still the quiet, observant boy from the dacha, but now he was overlaid with a patina of something dangerous and powerful. He moved with a liquid grace that was at odds with the stillness of his expression. He dismissed his two men with a barely perceptible nod. They took up positions by the elevator, becoming as motionless and unobtrusive as statues. "Lenochka," Dimitri said. His voice was the same as on the phone, calm, low, with the faint trace of an accent he had never lost. "Dimitri." She breathed her voice, barely a whisper. He crossed the room, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the marble. He stopped in front of her. He didn't offer a hug or any overt sign of affection. Instead, his gaze took in everything: her pale face, the dark circles under her eyes, the tension in her shoulders, the shattered crystal on the floor. His eyes lingered for a moment on the glittering shards. "He did this?" he asked, his voice soft, but the question was edged with steel. Lena could only nod, a fresh wave of tears threatening. "Tell me everything," he commanded gently. "From the beginning. Do not leave out a single detail." And so she did. Sitting on the white leather sofa where her world had crumbled, she told him everything. The year of distance, the lies, the gala, Brent's speech, Tiffany's triumphant smile. She told him about the necklace, the final petty cruelty that had broken her. As she spoke, Dimitri listened without interruption. His face remained a neutral mask, his icy eyes fixed on hers. He didn't offer sympathy or platitudes. He simply absorbed the information, filing it away with terrifying efficiency. When she finished the story, hung in the air between them, ugly and raw. "This man," Dimitri said, his tone flat, analytical. "Brentwood Coleman. He believes he is powerful." It was a statement, not a question. "He is," Lena said. "He has connections everywhere, in business, in politics. He owns half the city. He thinks he's untouchable." Dimitri allowed a small, cold smile to touch his lips. It did not reach his eyes. "Many men believe they are untouchable. It is a common delusion of the wealthy. They build their castles of glass and dare the world to throw stones." He walked over to the panoramic window and looked out at the city lights. For a long moment, he was silent. "What do you want, Lena?" he asked, his back still to her. The question caught her off guard. "What do you mean?" He turned to face her, his gaze intense. "I can make him disappear. A business trip to an undesirable location from which he does not return. An unfortunate accident in his expensive car. It would be simple. Clean. If that is what you want, you have but to ask. Lena stared at him horrified, and yet a dark, shameful part of her was tempted. The thought of Brent simply ceasing to exist was a seductive poison. But she shook her head. No, she said, her voice stronger now. That's not what I want. That's too easy. An accident is tragic. People would mourn him. They would remember Brent Coleman, the philanthropist of the year. His legacy would be intact. Tiffany would play the grieving widow. It would be a neat ending to his story. She stood up a fire she didn't know she possessed, starting to burn in her veins. I don't want him dead, Dimitri. I want him to live. I want him to live and watch everything he has built, everything he values, turn to ash in his hands. I want him to lose his money, his power, his reputation. I want him to feel the same humiliation he made me feel. I want him to be a ghost in his own life, just as he made me a ghost in mine. I want him to have nothing. I want him to be nothing. Dimitri watched her, a flicker of something approval, perhaps, in his cold eyes. You have your father's fire, Lenochka, he said quietly. My uncle would be proud. He walked to the study, his eyes scanning the room. He ran a hand over the polished mahogany desk. This life you built, he said. This man's empire. You were the architect, yes. I helped him, she admitted. I planned the parties cultivated. The connections chose the charities. I made him respectable. Good, Dimitri said. An architect knows the layout of the building. She knows where the load-bearing walls are. She knows the weaknesses in the foundation. He turned back to her. What I do is not about revenge. Revenge is a messy emotional act. What I do is about balance. This man has taken from you. He has created an imbalance. I will simply restore it. He pulled out his phone, a sleek, featureless black device, and typed a short message. Seconds later, his phone buzzed. He read the reply and nodded to himself. My people are already looking into his company, Coleman Capital, he said as casually as if he were ordering dinner. We will start there. You will stay here in this apartment. It is the safest place for you. My men will be outside. No one will enter without my permission. Your husband will find he is no longer welcome in his own home. He walked towards the elevator. Get some rest, Lena. The show is about to begin. Dimitri, she called out, stopping him. My cousin. Tiffany. Dimitri paused, his hand on the elevator button. His eyes became impossibly cold. For family who betrays family, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. There is a special kind of balance. Do not worry about her. I will design something appropriate. The elevator doors opened. He and his men stepped inside and were gone as silently as they had arrived. Lena was alone again, but the silence was different now. It was no longer the silence of despair. It was the silence of a coming storm. The ghost had arrived, and he was about to start throwing stones at the glass castle. Brent Coleman operated on a simple principle. The world was a chessboard, and he was the king. Everyone else was a pawn, to be positioned, sacrificed, and manipulated for his ultimate victory. His public humiliation of Lena was a strategic move, a power play, to demonstrate his dominance and introduce Tiffany as his new queen, all while controlling the narrative. He expected tears, a quiet settlement, and for Lena to fade gracefully into obscurity. He did not expect to be locked out of his own building. When he arrived the next morning, flanked by his lawyer, he found two stoic men in dark suits blocking the private entrance to the St. Regis residences. They didn't threaten him. They didn't even speak. They simply stood there, immovable objects radiating an aura of quiet lethality. The building's security chief, a man Brent paid a hefty Christmas bonus to every year, refused to make eye contact and mumbled something about new directives from the resident. "The resident I am, the owner," Brent roared, his face turning a blotchy red. The men remained silent, infuriated and embarrassed. Brent retreated. It was an annoyance, a childish tantrum from Lena. He'd have his lawyers handle it. But it was only the first tremor. The real earthquake began 2 days later in a sterile boardroom overlooking Tokyo Bay. Brent was counting on closing the Helios deal. It was a multi-billion-dollar merger with Helios Innovations, a Japanese tech giant, run by the notoriously meticulous and honorable Mr. Kenji Tanaka. This deal was Brent's masterpiece, the crown jewel that would elevate Coleman Capital into the global stratosphere. He had spent a year courting Tanaka, assuring him of his company's stability, transparency, and integrity. The meeting started well. Pleasantries were exchanged. Tea was served. Then, as they were about to review the final schematics, Mr. Tanaka's aide entered and handed him a thin, unmarked folder. Tanaka opened it. His benevolent expression slowly tightened as he read the first page. He continued to read, his face growing colder with each turn of the page. The folder contained a meticulously compiled dossier. It detailed a pattern of shell corporations, offshore accounts, and creative accounting practices within Coleman Capital. It highlighted a series of hostile takeovers where Brent had used insider information to bankrupt smaller companies before absorbing them. But the most damning evidence was a set of wiretap transcripts. Transcripts of Brent on the phone with his CFO laughing about how they had pulled the wool over the eyes of those honorable fools in Tokyo. Mr. Tanaka closed the folder and placed it gently on the table. He looked at Brent, his eyes like chips of obsidian. "Mr. Coleman," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "my grandfather taught me that a man's honor is the only currency that never loses its value. It appears you are bankrupt." He stood up, bowed curtly, and walked out of the room without another word. The deal was dead. Brent was stunned. Where did Tanaka get that information? The wiretaps, they were impossible. It had to be a rival firm. He scrambled back to New York, his mind racing. When he landed, his phone exploded with messages. The news of the failed Helios deal had already leaked. The stock of Coleman Capital was in free fall. The financial attack was only one front. The social assault was just as brutal and far more personal. Lena, on Dimitri's instruction, had provided a list. It was a list of all the powerful people they knew, the board members, the charity organizers, the society mavens. She knew their secrets, their insecurities, their pressure points. She knew who was having an affair, whose son had a gambling problem, who was hiding a corporate scandal. She had been their confessor, the keeper of their confidences for a decade. Dimitri's people went to work. They didn't make threats. They made quiet, reasonable suggestions. A hushed phone call to a hedge fund manager, casually mentioning that his wife might be interested to see photos of his recent business trip to the Cayman Islands. A friendly visit to an influential councilman, presenting him with evidence of his son's illegal street racing activities and suggesting that cutting ties with Brent Coleman would be a wise parental decision. One by one, Brent's allies vanished. Invitations to exclusive poker games stopped coming. His calls to fellow board members went to voicemail. When he showed up at his exclusive golf and country club, the manager Charles, who used to greet him with a deferential bow, met him at the door with a pained expression. "Mr. Coleman," Charles said, wringing his hands, "I'm afraid there's been a complaint. Several members have expressed discomfort. The board held an emergency meeting. Your membership has been suspended pending review." "Suspended on what grounds?" Brent sputtered. "Moral turpitude," Charles whispered, looking ashamed. Brent looked past him into the members' lounge. He saw them, the men he'd played golf with, whose children's private schools he'd written recommendation letters for. They saw him too, and they all turned away. He was an outcast, a pariah. The narrative he had tried to control at the gala had been hijacked. He was no longer the powerful man making a bold, honest choice. He was the adulterer who had publicly humiliated his classy, well-respected wife. He was the man whose character was so foul that the most powerful people in the city were shunning him. Even Tiffany was starting to feel the chill. Her invitations to fashion shows and charity luncheons dried up. The designer bags she was once gifted were now being requested back by PR firms. When she walked into a high-end boutique on Madison Avenue, the conversation would halt. She was no longer the exciting new mistress of a titan. She was a cheap home wrecker, a social climber who had hitched her wagon to a falling star. "You have to do something, Brent," she whined, pacing their suite at the Four Seasons, their temporary refuge. "People are treating me like trash." "What do you want me to do, Tiffany?" Brent snapped, loosening his tie. He had spent the day in disastrous meetings with his board, who were demanding his resignation. "This is Lena's doing. She's poisoning everyone against me." "Then fix it. You're Brent Coleman. You're supposed to be powerful. Power requires leverage," he growled, "and right now I seem to have none." He slumped into a chair, the weight of the last week crashing down on him. His empire was crumbling, his social life was annihilated, and his lover was revealing herself to be little more than a vapid parasite. For the first time in his adult life, Brent Coleman felt a sensation that was entirely foreign to him. Fear. He was losing control. The board, he commanded the city he ruled. It was all slipping through his fingers like sand. He felt like he was being hunted, but he couldn't see the predator. He was fighting a shadow, a ghost that was systematically dismantling his world brick by brick. And he had no idea that the architect of his destruction was sitting serenely in his own penthouse, sipping tea and watching the show. Paranoia is a slow poison. It starts as a faint metallic taste in the back of the throat and gradually contaminates every thought, every perception. For Brent, it began with small things. The persistent static on his private phone line. The feeling of being watched as he walked down the street. The way his driver, a man who'd been with him for 5 years, would flinch whenever Brent looked at him in the rearview mirror. One rainy Tuesday, his black Mercedes S-Class hydroplaned on a slick road, spinning a full 180 degrees before slamming into a guardrail. The police report called it an accident, caused by bald tires and excessive speed. But Brent had the car serviced meticulously. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that someone had tampered with it. He fired his driver, a man with 3 kids and a mortgage, without a second thought. The man just nodded, his face pale, with a fear that looked more like relief. His digital world became a minefield. Confidential files on his server at Coleman Capital were corrupted, terabytes of data gone. The IT department was baffled, blaming a sophisticated, untraceable virus. Then embarrassing emails, crude jokes, disparaging remarks about clients' intimate exchanges with Tiffany were leaked to a notorious financial gossip blog. The post went viral. The remaining vestiges of his professional reputation were incinerated overnight. Brent became a prisoner in his hotel suite. He stopped answering his phone. He drank heavily, the scotch that once tasted of success now tasting of ash and desperation. He would stand at the window for hours, staring down at the city that had once been his kingdom, now feeling like a vast, hostile jungle. Tiffany, who had signed up to be the queen of a titan, had little patience for being the consort of a paranoid recluse. The lack of social events and the endless tension wore on her. "Why are you so jumpy?" she demanded one afternoon, watching him check the locks on the door for the third time. "You're acting crazy." "They're watching us, Tiffany." He hissed, his eyes wild. "Don't you get it? This isn't just Lena pulling a few social strings. This is something else. Someone else is behind this." "You're just stressed because of the Helios deal," she said dismissively, scrolling through her phone, her face a mask of boredom. "You'll bounce back. You always do." Her inability to grasp the severity of the situation infuriated him. "Bounce back? My company's stock is worth less than toilet paper. My assets are being frozen by SEC investigations that popped up out of nowhere. We're living in a hotel because my own wife has me locked out of my home with some thugs. Well, maybe if you hadn't been so dramatic and cruel at the gala, none of this would be happening." She shot back, her voice rising. "You were supposed to handle it delicately." The argument escalated their gilded romance, devolving into a symphony of screamed accusations and bitter resentments. The foundation of their relationship, built on the thrill of transgression and the promise of power, was crumbling under the pressure. The knock on the door cut through their shouting match. They both froze. Brent crept to the door and looked through the peephole. Two men in conservative suits stood outside. They didn't look like Dimitri's men. They looked official. He opened the door a crack. "Yes." "Mr. Brentwood Coleman?" one of the men asked, flashing a badge. "Detective Harding, NYPD Major Case Squad. This is Detective Miller. We'd like to ask you a few questions." Brent's blood ran cold. "About what?" "About the financial dealings of Coleman Capital." Harding said, his expression unreadable. "Specifically regarding the bankruptcies of 3 smaller firms over the last 5 years. We have reason to believe fraudulent practices were involved." He paused, his eyes flicking to Tiffany, who was hovering in the background. "And about the disappearance of a Ms. Jessica Croft." Brent's mind went blank. Jessica Croft, a junior analyst at a rival firm, a woman he had an affair with 2 years ago, long before Tiffany, an affair that had ended badly when she threatened to expose his insider trading. He had paid her a substantial sum to disappear. He thought she had just moved to the West Coast. "I don't know anyone by that name," Brent said, his voice strained. "Really?" Detective Harding's smile was thin and unpleasant. "Because her personal effects were just found in a storage unit. Among them was a burner phone. The last number she ever called was yours. We have the records, Mr. Coleman. We'd like you to come down to the precinct to clear this up." It wasn't a request. As the detectives escorted a stunned Brent from the hotel suite, he felt the last of his control evaporate. This was no longer just about social ostracization or financial ruin. This was about his freedom. The ghost hunting him wasn't just content to bankrupt him, it was trying to bury him. Tiffany watched from the doorway, her face a mixture of shock and dawning horror. Her association with Brent had been a ticket to the top. Now she was linked to a man being investigated for fraud and a potential homicide. The scarlet dress and the stolen necklace seemed like a lifetime ago. She was in over her head, drowning in the wreckage of a life she had so eagerly helped to destroy. Back in the penthouse, Lena watched the news report on a tablet. A discreet camera planted by one of Dimitri's men in the hotel hallway had captured the entire exchange. She saw Brent's ashen face as the detectives led him away. She felt a grim, cold satisfaction, but it was not joy. It was the hollow feeling of a necessary demolition. Dimitri sat across from her, in an armchair, swirling a small glass of vodka. He hadn't spoken a word as they watched the feed. "Jessica Croft?" Lena asked quietly. "I never knew about her." "He has many secrets," Dimitri said, his voice flat. "Men like him collect them like trophies. They believe their secrets are buried deep. They forget that someone always knows where to dig." Did he kill her?" Dimitri took a sip of his vodka. He did not kill her with his hands, but his threats and his money forced her into a life of hiding and fear. She died of an overdose 6 months ago in a cheap motel in Nevada. Alone. Another imbalance. The police are now simply being guided to the truth. Lena looked at her cousin, this calm, dangerous man who had methodically and ruthlessly orchestrated the complete annihilation of her enemy. He had peeled back every layer of Brent's life, financial, social, and now criminal, with the precision of a surgeon. "It's almost over," Dimitri said, noticing the look on her face. "There is just one final lesson to be taught, to him and to her." The warehouse was in a desolate, forgotten corner of Red Hook, Brooklyn. The air smelled of salt rust and decay. Inside, the cavernous space was empty, save for a single pool of harsh industrial light, illuminating a simple wooden table and 3 chairs. This was Dimitri's stage, a place far from the glittering ballrooms and sleek boardrooms where Brent Coleman had once reigned supreme. Brent was brought in first. The last week had savaged him. After a 12-hour interrogation, he had been released, but he was a man broken. He hadn't slept. His expensive suit was rumpled and stained. The arrogance that had been his armor was gone, replaced by a raw, twitching fear. Dimitri's men guided him to a chair, and he collapsed into it, his hands trembling. A few minutes later, Tiffany Monroe was escorted in. She looked equally ravaged. The police had questioned her for hours. As a person of interest, her name now linked to Brent's spiraling legal troubles. Her designer clothes couldn't hide the terror in her eyes. She shot Brent a look of pure venom before being seated opposite him. Finally, Dimitri and Lena entered the circle of light. Dimitri moved with his usual quiet grace, a phantom in the gloom. Lena walked beside him, her posture straight, her face composed. She was dressed simply in black trousers and a silk blouse. She looked at Brent, not with hatred, but with a kind of distant clinical assessment. "Welcome," Dimitri said, his voice calm, yet it filled the vast space. "Thank you for coming. What is this? What do you want from me?" Brent stammered, his eyes darting between Dimitri and his silent, imposing men who stood in the shadows. "I want nothing," Dimitri replied. "I am merely a facilitator, an auditor, you might say. I am here to balance the books." He placed a tablet on the table and slid it towards Brent. The screen lit up, displaying bank statements, offshore account ledgers, and encrypted emails. "This is your life's work, is it not?" Dimitri asked. "The real work, not the philanthropy, the embezzlement from your company's pension fund, the money laundering through Cayman Island shell corporations, the systematic fraud that ruined dozens of families to build your own fortune. The detectives found some of it. My people found all of it." Brent stared at the screen, his face turning the color of ash. It was all there. Every dirty secret, every illegal transaction, his entire criminal enterprise laid bare. This information has been packaged and delivered to 2 places, Dimitri continued conversationally. The district attorney's office and the SEC. Your legal troubles, Mr. Coleman, are just beginning. You will spend the rest of your life in courtrooms and eventually a small government-funded room. Your name will be a synonym for fraud. Brent's head sank into his hands. A choked sob escaped his lips. Please, I'll give you anything. Money. Whatever you want. You have nothing that I want, Dimitri said dismissively. He then turned his cold gaze to Tiffany. Ms. Monroe, he said, his voice dangerously soft. You chose your side. You aligned yourself with this man. For profit and status. A business decision. I didn't know about any of this, Tiffany cried, gesturing wildly at Brent. He lied to me. I'm a victim here, too. Dimitri smiled, a chilling, predatory expression. A victim, no. You are an opportunist. And opportunists should understand the risks of their investments. He slid a second tablet across the table to her. This one showed something different. It was a recorded conversation from her hotel room, captured by a device one of Dimitri's people had planted. It was a phone call Tiffany had made just 2 days ago, after Brent had been taken in for questioning. The call was to her lawyer. Her voice, clear and panicked, filled the warehouse. Have to cut a deal. I know things about Brent. Things he told me in confidence. About the Helios deal, about the creative accounting. I can give them enough to put him away for good. I need full immunity. I'm not going down with him. The recording ended. The silence in the warehouse was absolute. Brent lifted his head slowly, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with disbelief fixed on Tiffany. The final betrayal from the woman for whom he had thrown everything away was more devastating than any financial ruin. You snake, he whispered, his voice cracking. I had to save myself, Brent, she shrieked back. You were sinking. Were you just going to drag me down with you? Enough. Lena's voice cut through the air, sharp and clear. It was the first time she had spoken. Both Brent and Tiffany flinched, turning to look at her, as if noticing her for the first time. She stood and walked around the table until she was standing directly in front of her husband. She looked down at the pathetic, broken man, hunched in the chair. Do you remember what you said to me, Brent? She asked, her voice steady and cold. You said my grandmother's necklace was just a thing. You said I was being sentimental. You built your entire life on the idea that everything people loyalty, love, honor is just a thing to be bought, sold, or discarded when it's no longer useful. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the sapphire necklace. Dimitri's men had recovered it from Tiffany's hotel room. It glinted in the harsh light. This was never about the necklace, Lena said, her voice dropping to a whisper. It was about what it represented. It represents history, and family, and love. Concepts you cannot comprehend. She looked from Brent's shattered face to Tiffany's terrified one. You two deserve each other. You are 2 sides of the same worthless coin. She then turned to Dimitri. I am finished here. She let the necklace drop from her fingers. It clattered onto the table between Brent and Tiffany, a final damning punctuation mark on their sordid affair. Lena turned her back on them both and walked towards the exit without a second glance. She didn't need to see the end. She had already designed the demolition. Dimitri watched her go, a rare hint of pride in his icy eyes. He gave a small nod to his men. The lights in the warehouse cut out, plunging Brent and Tiffany into absolute darkness, alone with their betrayals and the sound of their own panicked breathing. They were left for the authorities, who had received an anonymous tip about their location just moments before. The ghost's work was done. The books were balanced. 6 months later, the name Brent Coleman was no longer a symbol of power, but a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. His trial was a media sensation, a spectacular fall from grace. Faced with irrefutable evidence of massive fraud embezzlement and his connection to the circumstances surrounding Jessica Croft's death, he was sentenced to 25 years in a federal penitentiary. His assets were seized, his company dismantled, and his legacy reduced to a Wikipedia page detailing his crimes. He had lost everything just as Lena had wanted. He was nothing. Tiffany Monroe, in exchange for her testimony against Brent, received a reduced sentence for conspiracy, serving 18 months in a low-security facility. When she was released, she vanished into obscurity, her name and face too toxic for the high society world she had so desperately craved. She was last seen working as a hostess in a Midwest chain restaurant, the ghost of a life she'd almost had. The St. Regis penthouse, with its panoramic views and painful memories, was sold. The proceeds, along with the generous settlement Brent had offered, were donated by Lena to a charity for victims of corporate fraud. She kept nothing from that life, save for her grandmother's necklace. Lena didn't return to the world of galas and high society. She had seen the rot beneath the gilded surface and wanted no part of it. Instead, she moved to a quiet, sunlit apartment in a brownstone downtown. She went back to her first love, the one she'd abandoned to become Mrs. Coleman Architecture. She opened a small boutique firm with a former colleague from university. They didn't design glass towers for corporate titans. They designed community centers, affordable housing projects, and public parks. She poured her energy not into demolishing a life, but into building new foundations for others. She found a quiet, profound satisfaction in creating something real, something that would last. One crisp autumn afternoon, as she was sketching blueprints in her new airy office, Dimitri appeared in the doorway. He was dressed in a simple cashmere sweater and jeans, looking more like a visiting professor than an international crime lord. "Lenochka," he said softly. She looked up and smiled, a genuine, untroubled smile. "Dimitri, I didn't know you were in town." "I was passing through," he said, which was his way of saying he had made a special trip. His eyes scanned her office, the drafting tables, the models of buildings, the sunlight streaming through the windows. "You have built something good here." "I'm trying," she said. He stepped forward and placed a small, beautifully wrapped box on her desk. A housewarming gift. She opened it. Inside was a first-edition copy of a famous book on architectural theory she had told him she loved as a child. It was a small, thoughtful gesture, a reminder of the bond that ran deeper than the darkness he inhabited. "Thank you, Dimitri," she said, her voice thick with emotion. He simply nodded. "If you ever need anything." "I know," she finished for him. "But I think I can handle it from here." A rare, true smile touched his lips. He looked at his cousin, no longer a broken woman in a sapphire dress, but a confident architect of her own life, surrounded by her own creations. The balance had been restored. He had come when she called a ghost to wage her war. But he was leaving a woman who had found her own strength in the ruins. He turned and left as quietly as he had arrived. Lena watched him go, then turned back to her blueprints. She picked up her pen, the tip hovering over the clean white page, ready to draw the lines of a new and better future, one of her own design. Lena's story is a powerful reminder that the deepest betrayals often come from those closest to us, but it's also a story of incredible resilience. It shows that even when your world is burned to the ground by someone you trusted, you have the power to rise from the ashes, not as a victim, but as the architect of a new, stronger life. She didn't let one man's cruelty define her ending. She made it the brutal, necessary beginning of her own story. What did you think of Dimitri's methods? Was it justice, or was it pure revenge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by Lena's journey from heartbreak to empowerment, please hit that like button to show your support. Don't forget to share this story with someone who might need a reminder of their own inner strength. And of course, if you want more gripping tales of justice and comeback, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss the stories we have coming up. Thank you for listening.